Thomas Kuzma, good to have you on the program.
It's a pleasure.
How do you explain autism to someone who may not, well, they may have heard about it, but they may not be familiar really with what it is?
Well, there's a few points that I can talk to you about. First of all, when it comes to autism, it's a neurological disorder or disability. That's why they call it autism spectrum disorder. I myself am one of the high-functioning autistics, if you will. And through my life and through who I've met, I've learnt many things, including number one, when you've met one person on the spectrum, you've met one person on the spectrum.
Because people are very different. They're individuals.
Yes.
I was just wondering about that. Do you think that people have, when they hear about autism, they may associate it with certain behaviours that they just apply to everybody? They think that autism is the same for everyone who has it.
I get that a lot. I even get people saying, you know, everyone's autistic, when that's not quite so. The thing is, people can have autistic traits, but that doesn't mean they're a little bit autistic.
What's the difference then? Because what you hear a lot about a spectrum, if for argument's sake, a spectrum is 1 to 5, just for argument's sake, what would autistic traits be, and how would that be different to having autism?
You see, when it comes to living on the spectrum, everyone knows you have the main 5 senses with the seeing and the smelling and the touching. But what no one ever really talks about is the social sense. And that's the sense of how you are in the social scene. Who are you talking to right now? What topics of discussion are available to you at this very moment? This works in both personal, in friendship groups, in work and on the school ground. It always comes into play everywhere you go.
And this is what we're talking about with autism, is it? It's in this social sense.
Yes. Now, this type of matter is something that people on the spectrum will always have. They will always have trouble trying to understand certain points of view. They can learn and they can adapt. I know that myself, but for others, it can be really hard for them to understand.
There is a common perception, and you know, you hear it a lot, and that is that autism is associated with some emotional distance, that there is a difficulty in forming those deeper connections. And it falls into that idea of the social sense that you were talking about. And correct me if I'm wrong about this, but that is a public sort of common perception, isn't it?
It is, and because of that, we're always related to those types of really distant type characters like Spock, Sheldon Cooper and Sherlock Holmes.
So people who are perhaps distant, perhaps quirky would have been the word.
Yeah, that's probably the
word that was used. But also incredibly high functioning and incredibly talented as well, in a specific thing.
I'm glad you put talented in there. Up until very recently, autism's been seen as a deficit type model. Back when autism first originated, Hans Asperger really put into place how, when it comes to the autism type diagnosis, it's not just the deficits that we're looking at, but also the talents as well. Not in spite of, but are a certain trait of what makes autism.
And let's look at your case. When were you first confirmed or diagnosed as having autism?
Well, it was back in 2006, back when Star Wars finished its prequel trilogy.
So you're into your teens at this point?
That's right. I was being heavily bullied, which is a major important issue for a lot of people on the spectrum. I was seeing a therapist, and she asked me, "Thomas, have you ever heard of Asperger's syndrome?" And I said, "What kind of burger?" It wasn't until about a few weeks later that I started to find out more about this condition.
And then did a light go on and you say, "Oh, this sounds like
This sounds like me," yeah. I got tested, and with that, I started to really understand, what does it mean to be an autistic person? I had to learn, sometimes the hard way, sometimes the good way, that autism's nothing to be ashamed of. It is a fantastic matter that affects us in a variety of ways. And what really is important is trying to make sure that more people are inclusive of those matters.
You talked before about the talents and the things that people have difficulty with as well. Let's start with the talents. If you were to say, okay, what are the things that you think that you have that may be a result of your Asperger's that gives you a specific or a particular talent?
Well, I'm a big fan of TV shows and movies. And because
Star Wars, I know you're a big fan. You just mentioned it.
I love Star Wars and Transformers.
You've mentioned Pokemon as well.
Pokemon, oh my gosh. I've learned through my time on Earth, I wasn't an alien. I've learned through my time here that I can almost emulate certain characters on TV shows. But that's a little bit of what people on the spectrum do with echolalia. But what applies to me is that I've learned from my family and from my friends that I have a magnetic personality, that I'm always there to, see how they're doing.
Well, you're energetic and you're infectious and you're a great talker. If we were to look at the other side, what are the things you think you might struggle with? Well,
I know for a fact that I have a problem with time management skills.
You're not alone there.
Yeah. I'm like the Sydney trains. Don't get me started on those. I go and, in order for me to maintain routine and structure, I have to go and create an actual plan of what I need to do. Now, I'm not going to follow it every single time. I mean, we're not Supermen here.
But you like to know what you're doing, it gives you routine, it gives you structure, and you try to stick to that.
Exactly, and that's what a lot of people on the spectrum are just asking for.
I've also read, I read a little bit about you before we sat down.
Thank you very much.
And you do blog.
Yes.
And I read your blog, and you said you have difficulty letting go of things, particularly things that may be negative or hurtful or harmful. You mentioned bullying, and you have difficulty letting go of those things. Is that a reflection too? Does that come out of the autism that you have?
I like to think that it's a very common trait, yes. I would say that the reason why a lot of people on the spectrum have a hard time letting go is because we're very passionate people. If there's something that we love, we'll get right into it. But if there's something that we hate, we are going to melt down over it. Meltdown is a matter when something happens to someone on the spectrum that is detrimental, or if something repeatedly happens, they're going to have an outburst because they need to let go of that energy.
And what does that outburst look like?
It can look like stomping, getting really angry, yelling and screaming sometimes, just trying to get any way to unleash that type of energy. I usually just clench up my fists when I'm really, I can't swear, when I'm really ticked off.
And you're considered high functioning. You know, you're working, you're functioning. What about others who may be on the spectrum that may be more challenged, that may be more difficult?
Well, take Employable Me, for example. A lot of what has been shown on that TV show are some very common traits that are displayed throughout the autism community whilst trying to find employment. I tried to work for I tried to find a job with a giant tech company. I won't say which one, but let's say they've got large windows.
Okay.
I went to a group interview, and I had to both struggle with the fact that I was talking to one person whilst competing against all these other 20 people in order to find my job at this company. I was actually quite glad that I didn't end up there because I know that my talents lie in my creativity, which is, my writing. I'd love to write a TV show one day. We won't.
I'm sure you can do that.
In reporting, in talking, and just communicating with others.
So what's the future hold for you, Thomas? When you look ahead, what do you want to achieve in your life?
I've just started my last edit on my first book. It's called The Aspie Discovery. It was originally The Aspie Odyssey, but I realized I had to cut it into 3 books. And I'm going to be talking about what it means to be on the spectrum in high school you have people talking about living on the spectrum, but no one talks about, you know, what it's like to be autistic today. And the world has changed. You have, you know, you've got your phones and you've got your Game Boys. Well, not Game Boys, Nintendo DSs. And because of this, the technology that people on the spectrum love can be really applied to social matters. And I think that's important to take down. What they love, what they are good at, and where they can go.
Well, and you've certainly displayed all of that, and you're terrific to talk to you. It was really interesting. You've really opened a window into the world of people with autism as well. Thanks so much, Thomas.
No, it's been a pleasure.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you.
Thank you.